the Caribbean woke up to a dangerous signal. Within just 48 hours, 2 Venezuelan F-16 fighter jets swept close to a U.S. Navy destroyer, USS Jason Dunham. The Pentagon calls it reckless, a deliberate test of nerves on the open sea. What makes it more alarming is the timing. The flyovers came as America deployed 10 stealth F-35 jets to Puerto Rico. It looks like a contest of strength, but in reality, it is a test of red lines. A single wrong move in these crowded waters could turn a symbolic gesture into a regional crisis. The question now is simple. How close are we to that tipping point? Let's find out with military force. The repeated flyovers of USS Jason Dunham by Venezuelan F-16s within 48 hours signal a deliberate challenge, not a navigation mishap. On September 4, 2025, 2 Venezuelan fighter jets overflew the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, a move described by the Pentagon as highly provocative, happening just 2 days after it struck a suspected narco-terror vessel in the Caribbean. Only 24 hours later, the same jets executed a second, equally risky pass above the ship, escalating the situation into what military officials called a game of chicken. USS Jason Dunham was not trespassing. It was operating lawfully in international waters, entirely within its right to sail. According to Navy Times, the vessel was part of a U.S. flotilla deploying to counter narcotics operations in the region when the flyovers occurred, emphasizing that the ship's presence was above board and lawful. Despite that, the 2 F-16 entered into close proximity, well within weapons range, a margin that could be crossed from maneuver to conflict if aircraft or ship miscalculated. The timing of these maneuvers was no accident. Caracas intended to test Washington's resolve and demonstrate defiance. The double flyovers coincided with U.S. President Trump's order to deploy 10 F-35 stealth fighters to Puerto Rico, signaling America's increasing projection of power in the Caribbean. As a result, observers interpret the flybys as Venezuelan political theater, a calculated move designed to provoke and gauge U.S. reaction without yet crossing the threshold into armed conflict. This interaction wasn't random or reckless. It was a strategic, symbolic confrontation meant to convey that Venezuela, inexperienced and under-resourced, was still willing to stand up to U.S. presumption over the region. With that clear message delivered, the real escalation began when Washington decided that words alone were no longer enough. Venezuela relies on aging Block 15 F-16s, a fleet now reduced to roughly a dozen operational fighters from its 1980s heyday. These jets began service more than 40 years ago, when Caracas was among the first Latin American capitals to buy U.S.-made fighters. Today, experts estimate that only about 12 remain fully mission-capable due to a shortage of spare parts and limited maintenance capacity. That small number reflects severe attrition, forcing the Venezuelan Air Force to ration flying hours and restrict training to preserve what is left. In practice, this creates an air wing that is fragile, operating at the edge of sustainability. Their weapons highlight this weakness even further. Most of the Block 15s carry short-range AIM-9 Sidewinders, or Israeli-made Python missiles, alongside unguided bombs and rocket pods. These arms can be dangerous at close range but have little ability to strike from distance. Analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly note that this setup limits Venezuela's reach beyond a few miles, making them effective for intimidation but not for modern air combat against stealth aircraft or long-range bombers. Pilots flying at low altitude to deliver such weapons risk exposure to radar-guided countermeasures, further reducing survival chances in real combat. The gap between these Cold War-era fighters and the F-35s now stationed in Puerto Rico is vast. Venezuela also owns a handful of Russian-made Su-30 Mk2 fighters bought to diversify its fleet. In theory, these twin-engine jets offer longer range and heavier payload, with better radar and missile systems than the old F-16. Yet sanctions and logistics problems mean that fewer than 5 Su-30s are thought to be airworthy at any one time, crippled by the lack of spare engines and avionics support. Rather than filling the gap, these Sukhois complicate operations sometimes grounded for months. They fail to provide the steady deterrence that Venezuela's defense planners intended. This imbalance explains why Caracas uses its small fleet for political theater rather than serious combat drills. The two flyovers near USS Jason Dunham in the Caribbean were less about testing air combat readiness and more about making a statement. By pushing old F-16s close to an American destroyer, Caracas sends a message of defiance at home and signals resistance abroad. These aircraft become tools of propaganda, not instruments of warfighting. For the government, the presence of a jet streaking past a U.S. warship creates a visual of strength that resonates domestically, even if the reality is far weaker. Such signaling carries echoes of the Cold War, when presence often outweighed firepower. Just as Soviet and U.S. aircraft once shadowed each other to display resolve, Venezuela now tries to recreate that image on a smaller scale. In this case, the tactic generates headlines and provokes Washington without demanding sustained combat. Even an outdated F-16 buzzing an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer can shift the media narrative, momentarily placing Caracas on the same stage as a superpower. But symbolism cannot mask military decline. Venezuela's limited fleet faces a U.S. presence that is far more advanced and overwhelming. America's stealth fighters, nuclear submarines, and layered missile defenses are designed to dominate any confrontation. For Caracas, the flyovers are a gamble, brief moments of visibility against a backdrop of vulnerability. America's response is defined by overwhelming technological and naval presence, not just a single ship standing its ground. In early September 2025, Washington deployed 10 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters to Puerto Rico, delivering a sharp boost to regional surveillance and interception. These jets carry radar-busting sensors, advanced low-observable design, and real-time data links that connect instantly with satellites and naval units. According to Defense News, September 2025, the addition of the F-35s means the U.S. can not only respond quickly, but also detect and strike before adversaries even know it is watching. Their arrival sent a clear signal that the skies above the Caribbean were under constant watch. At sea, the backbone of deterrence came from Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. The USS Jason Dunham, USS Gravely, and USS Sampson formed a visible chain of protection across international waters. Each destroyer carries more than 90 vertical launch missiles, giving them the power to intercept aircraft, block incoming threats, or strike targets on land and sea. As Navy Times noted in September 2025, these destroyers represent a forward line of projection, warning that any reckless move would meet an instant, precise response. Their presence reinforced that the U.S. commitment in the region was not symbolic but operational, standing ready for action every hour of the day. Adding depth to this shield was the cruiser USS Lake Erie. With more than 120 missiles on board, the cruiser served as the central node in the fleet's layered air defense. Naval Institute Press, 2025, emphasized that Lake Erie is built to coordinate missile intercepts at long ranges, creating an umbrella that protects not only the ships but also regional airspace. Its capacity to neutralize aerial threats far from the shoreline marked a clear escalation in layered defense. For Venezuela's small F-16 fleet, approaching within range of such a cruiser would mean facing advanced interceptors guided by one of the most integrated radar systems afloat. Beneath the surface, deterrence took an invisible form. A nuclear-powered submarine, whose exact position remained undisclosed, patrolled Caribbean waters. Defense 1, 2025, underlined that U.S. submarines can launch long-range cruise missiles, track vessels undetected, and create constant uncertainty for adversaries. This unseen presence forced Venezuelan pilots and commanders to factor in risks they could neither see nor predict. The silent ability to strike at any moment is a deterrent more powerful than words, raising the stakes of every encounter. On top of that, the amphibious ready group completed the layered posture. Centered on the USS Iwo Jima, supported by USS San Antonio and USS Fort Lauderdale. This group carried over 4,500 Marines from the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. It looked like a small carrier force, but its strength lay in flexibility. Marines could launch helicopter raids, secure ports, deliver disaster relief, or hold territory with heavy armor. Marine Corps Times, 2025, highlighted that the MEU-22 is trained for rapid reaction, switching between combat, rescue, and humanitarian missions with minimal preparation. In a tense environment like the Caribbean, this force was both a stabilizer and a warning that the U.S. could escalate quickly if provoked. Together, this networked presence transformed the Caribbean into an American-controlled domain. The F-35s created a surveillance ceiling, spotting threats before they arrived. The Arleigh Burke destroyers set up rings of deterrence, ready to intercept missiles or aircraft. The cruiser Lake Erie reinforced the defensive wall with long-range missile coverage. The nuclear submarine injected silent unpredictability, an unseen guardian beneath the waves. The Marines aboard the amphibious group provided both rapid crisis response and humanitarian flexibility. This combination created a layered dominance across sea, air, and land that no single Venezuelan flyover could hope to challenge. The result was unmistakable. The United States demonstrated not just presence, but a complete operating system designed for control and deterrence. Each piece, air, sea, and undersea, connected into one whole. Caracas might attempt another low-level flyover for political theater, but every observer in the region now knew that such actions would occur under the shadow of unmatched American firepower. Still, even overwhelming power does not erase the risks of escalation in these narrow waters. Rumors swirl that the U.S. may reinforce its presence further by sending more amphibious assault ships, destroyers, or even a carrier strike group to the Caribbean. Analysts in mid-September 2025 suggested that Washington could redirect naval assets from the Atlantic Fleet to bolster deterrence in the region, citing unnamed Pentagon sources preparing reinforcement plans in case Venezuela escalates further. Adding these vessels would enhance U.S. ability to respond to crises, but also raises the stakes in waters where small missteps can spiral quickly. At the same time, the U.S. could deploy additional fighter squadrons including F-15 or F-16 from mainland bases to Puerto Rico or even Florida. Military flight logs and news outlets reported on September 6th that Strategic Air Command units were on standby to relocate jets if tensions remained high. Getting more jets airborne would strengthen aerial surveillance and quick reaction intercept capability, but trailing tensions in a confined region risks rapid confrontation. The Caribbean's narrow sea lanes and dense traffic heightened the danger of miscalculations or radar mishaps, triggering unintended clashes. Mariners and aviators know these waters teem with civilian ships, airline routes, and tourism traffic, making any close maneuver or communication failure potentially catastrophic. Coast Guard reports warn that overlapping radar signals near Puerto Rico and Haiti increase collision risk and misidentification of aircraft. In such conditions, fear and confusion could easily translate into a tragic escalation. If one of Venezuela's F-16s were shot down during another provocative flyby, Caracas might seek political or military backing from Russia or China to press its case. As experts noted, Moscow and Beijing already support Venezuela with fuel, food, and limited military aid. A forced shoot-down could trigger diplomatic calls for solidarity or even material assistance. Analysts compare this to how Cold War alliances activated after crises, and point out that both powers might intervene politically if their ally appeared threatened. Though unlikely to deploy boots on the ground, such involvement raises the stakes diplomatically. This standoff echoes the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when Brinkmanship nearly led to nuclear war, showing how a regional dispute can grip the world. The parallels are clear. Both involve great powers testing resolve near U.S. shores, using military posturing to send messages. Scholars say those 13 tense days demonstrated the thin line between show-of-force maneuvers and actual war. Today, modern platforms replace ballistic missiles, but the underlying danger of miscalculation persists, especially when messaging and reality are dangerously close. And just as in history, every confrontation at sea carries lessons for today's fragile balance. Venezuela has been forced to lean heavily on outside powers, with Russia, China, and Iran emerging as its lifelines in 2025. Facing sanctions and collapsing oil revenues, Caracas turned toward Moscow first. In May 2025, President Nicolas Maduro traveled to Russia to sign a strategic partnership agreement with Vladimir Putin, promising closer energy cooperation, military coordination, and shared resistance against Western sanctions. This deal highlighted how Venezuela's dwindling options pushed it deeper into Russia's orbit at a time when its domestic economy was unraveling. Trade figures confirm how critical this support has become. Russian data shows bilateral trade grew by more than 60% in 2024, mainly through oil swaps and fuel shipments that helped Venezuela keep its power grid alive. Iran provided smaller but politically important backing, sending tankers and offering intelligence cooperation. Meanwhile, China stepped in with targeted investments in Venezuelan oil fields and refinery repairs, creating an economic bridge that blunted Washington's sanctions. These partnerships do not erase the crisis but give Maduro enough leverage to stage political defiance, like ordering F-16 flyovers near U.S. warships to project strength at home. Washington views these moves not only as irritants, but as direct challenges to U.S. security in the Caribbean, a region long treated as America's strategic third border. The Caribbean Sea connects directly to U.S. coastal states and key naval hubs in Florida, Georgia, and Virginia. Analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies describe the region as a critical buffer where instability quickly translates into risks for homeland security. For the Pentagon, any attempt by Russia, China, or Iran to establish a foothold in the Caribbean, whether through naval deployments, arms deals, or intelligence hubs, is seen as unacceptable encroachment. This explains why Washington has responded with forceful deployments and firm diplomatic warnings. The United States has built layered defenses in the Caribbean precisely to prevent rivals from filling the vacuum. By sending F-35 fighters to Puerto Rico and stationing destroyers near Venezuela's coastline, Washington is reminding both allies and adversaries that the Caribbean is not neutral ground but an extension of U.S. security space. This signal resonates with regional partners, from Colombia to the Dominican Republic, who depend on U.S. security cooperation to shield them from spillover crises. Inside Venezuela, however, the crisis drives different calculations. Inflation reached nearly 200% in early 2025, while basic goods shortages continue to spark protests across major cities. Mercopress, May 2025. In this fragile environment, dramatic military gestures like buzzing a U.S. destroyer with old F-16 serve as political theater. They allow Maduro to frame himself as a defender of sovereignty standing up to Washington, distracting from the worsening daily reality faced by citizens. These provocations, while militarily weak, become powerful tools of propaganda at home, where government-controlled media amplifies every confrontation. For Washington, the answer has been to double down on deterrence and reassure allies that American power in the Caribbean remains unmatched. In February and again in August 2025, Secretary of State Marco Rubio toured Caribbean nations, promising greater cooperation against narcotics trafficking and warning against allowing Chinese or Russian influence in local ports. The Caribbean Basin Security Initiative also expanded funding for intelligence sharing and joint patrols, cementing America's image as the guarantor of regional stability. This outreach highlights the other audience for U.S. deployments, not only Venezuela, but also the neighbors watching closely to see if Washington will stand firm. The contrast could not be sharper. Venezuela clings to outdated jets, foreign backers, and political spectacle to mask decline, while the United States operates stealth fighters, nuclear submarines, and integrated alliances that cover the Caribbean like a shield. For Russia and China, providing lifelines to Caracas costs little, but creates pressure on Washington. For the US, however, these waters are not negotiable. They are tied directly to its national security. All of this leads to the final question: what lies ahead if neither side backs down? 2 Venezuelan flyovers in just 48 hours have turned the Caribbean into a new flashpoint. The incidents may look symbolic, but in waters so tight, even a single miscalculation can spark a crisis. The balance of power is clear. US stealth fighters, nuclear submarines, and warships stand far ahead of Venezuela's small and aging fleet. Yet history reminds us that conflicts often start not with missiles, but with symbolic moves that spiral out of control. In the 21st century, deterrence and perception are as powerful as weapons themselves. A low-flying jet or a sharp warning at sea can shift the mood of nations and test alliances. The real question now is simple: will Washington and Caracas step back from the edge, or are we watching the first sparks of a dangerous new storm? Subscribe to Military Force for more sharp, in-depth analysis of global security and strategy.